Welcome to Equine Assisted World. I'm your host, Rupert Isaacson, New York Times bestselling author of The Horse Boy, The Long Ride Home and The Healing Land. Before I jump in with today's guest, I just want to say a huge thank you to you, our audience, for helping to make this happen. I have a request. If you like what we do, please like, subscribe, tell a friend. It really helps us get this work done. As you might know from my books, I'm an autism dad. And over the last 20 years, we've developed several equine-assisted, neuroscience-backed certification programs. If you'd like to find out more about them, go to newtrailslearning.com. So without further ado, let's meet today's guest. Welcome back to Equine Assisted World. Betsy Kahl, who is joining me today, is an old compadre. We used to run New Trails together, our ranch in Texas, and we couldn't have done it without Betsy. Betsy was the mainstay, the rudder, the lifeblood, all the good things. And one of the reasons why Betsy was all these things was not just her knowledge of horses, but the fact that she had come a really interesting path through what used to be NARA. She's a senior path instructor, which was interesting for us because people normally see Horseboy as the sort of antithesis, the opposite of path. And in some ways, that's not unfounded. And at the same time as working with us, she continued to work at the local large path center in Austin, Texas, not just as a service provider, but also as a senior instructor in the path trainings. So it was very interesting that she really bridged that gap. She's also a very accomplished dressage rider and trainer and all-round horse person. So if you look up the word awesome in the dictionary, you actually find a picture of Betsy next to that word. So Betsy, thanks for coming on. You now live in Bend, Oregon, doing interesting things in the Rockies. Thanks for coming on the show. I want to delve into your knowledge of where you feel equine assisted work was when you first got into it, where you feel it is now, and where you would like it to go. So over to you.
Great. Well, thank you. Yeah, it's been a fun journey, the time I've shared with you and the time we had in Texas together. And yeah, for path people who may be listening, I'm an advanced therapeutic riding instructor with the CTRI certification as well. So we've been going through quite a lot of acronyms and other things in the industry. But yes, so for those who care about letters after names, that's what it would be. And I believe I was certified, oh lordy, back in like 2007, 2006, 2006 sounds about right. And so it's been quite some time that I've carried that certification and worked in and out of the industry as people often do. So I'm not sure how much you want to know or where you want to start with any of that, but
I think what I'd like you to do is shoot from the hip.
Okay.
Because you have a really good overview of what's good about each system, where they probably have more in common than they might think they do.
Mhm.
Um, and you yourself have had to tread the line of melding, the different methodologies together, whether it was working, in a path context, but informed by Horseboy, say, or Tackeen, which you also helped me develop, which we should go into, and the other way around, working in Horseboy and Tackeen, but informed by, I guess, the orthodoxy of the mainstream as well as being on the edge. It's a really interesting, I don't know anyone else really who's trodden
Yeah.
that path, So
Mm.
I think it's really over to you. I'd like you to sort of fire Talk
Okay.
about what was good, what was bad, what you'd like to see change, what you'd like to develop more of. Just go.
Mhm. Okay. Well, one thing that came to mind as you were talking was obviously I didn't, well, not obviously, but I didn't just, one day be like, oh, I want to be a path instructor. So I was very fortunate growing up we had in the public park system near where I lived, there was a riding facility that was part of a nonprofit park system and offered riding lessons, boarding, and also therapeutic riding. So I grew up riding there starting around age 12. And so the horses that I learned to ride on were all exceptionally talented, very kind, some maybe not as kind, but all just generous horses that could walk, trot, canter, and jump. And these were the horses that would one day a week also work in adaptive riding as well when they offered it. So I think even just growing up there and seeing it was sort of a normal thing that your horses that would work in therapeutic programs could also teach, could also compete in local shows, could also do all of the things, right?
Yeah, it
And
wasn't niche from the get-go.
no, no. And it was a thing that as I've worked in different programs and different places and kind of traveled I've taught from New Hampshire to Ohio, Texas, and now Oregon. So, I mean, as you kind of move across the country, you start to see different things of what is and is not sort of the assumed normal. And so I started to realize like, oh, well, this is unique. What valley riding, which is still hands down, I say one of the best places to learn and still
Valley Riding?
Valley Riding Incorporated, yeah. It's run by
Valley Riding Incorporated in Cleveland, Ohio.
yeah, yeah. Anyone who's looking to learn to ride or if you have kids that wanna ride, go there, best horses.
Okay.
Actually, one horse that when I was teaching there is still I found him for the program, and he's still in the program. This little pony named Bumper. I mean, gotta love him. So and Bumper was Mr. Jack of all trades too, walk, trot, canter, jump, did adaptive, did all the things, and apparently still is doing all those things. So yeah, it was just very normal to believe a horse could do all of that. And not every horse wanted to work in the adaptive program but that was fine too, right? They all had a place. They all had their purpose. And so that I think was where that idea of like, yeah, a horse is not limited. Like
Mm.
there actually will, if you offer the right support and the right timing, like will want to show up. They want to work and feel good about their jobs. And
Yeah, they enjoy variety like a human does,
yeah,
basically.
yeah, yeah. And again, because it was in a public park system, there were trails, so you could easily just go out from the arena down the trail. You had all the bonuses that come with the public park system. Like, you never knew what would be around the corner sometimes or who would
Right.
be hanging over the fence. But yeah, it was lovely. And so that's where I first encountered adaptive riding too, is when they started offering that program. I started volunteering because I was probably, 14 is the age where PATH allows you to start to volunteer. And that's how I became exposed to it and always enjoyed it, but didn't pursue that in college. So there was a brief, so I guess from like 12 to 18, I did nothing but eat, sleep, breathe horses while maintaining grades so I could continue doing that. And then went off to college, was out of horses for a while. And I think probably started getting back into it around like 24 ish and just go back into taking riding lessons. And then decided I wanted to pursue getting certified. And so I went to get certified at a place in New Hampshire. They did like a 3-month instructor intensive, I suppose. And also a place there where their horses worked in summer camps, would walk, trot, can, or jump, you know? So they were also horses that, in addition to doing adaptive riding, could do a variety of other programming. And so, yeah, was at Horsepower in Temple, New Hampshire. And that's where I found my current horse. One of my current horses, Stuart. He was there as a I don't even know what sail horse. So I took him on as my training project while I was getting certified because that was something their program had you do as well. Was like not just go through the technical aspect of teaching and how you're supposed to structure a class and all the, safety standards that are very important as well. But in addition to that, they wanted to make sure that you were teaching riding lessons to, at least for me, I was teaching lessons to the public and also had your horse training project too. So that, depending on what you could offer, that you were bringing a horse along. So Stuart was my training project that ended up becoming my forever project. So, so, so I think,
Yeah.
yeah, there might be some things in there you want to.
Well, I think there's something that we should just quickly cover, which is that what you did at college. So you're a social worker,
Well,
and
not in college.
yeah, right. So
I had yeah, but I currently am a social worker and
which I
did
think
not study.
massively informs you do your equine assisted stuff. So just talk through what you did at college and how you became a social worker, and then how
Mm,
that informed what you
okay.
do with horses.
Yeah. In college, oh, I thought I wanted to do pre-veterinary medicine. I quickly realized that was not for me. Perhaps I was not up for the academic rigor. We can put it that way. And then did a semester in business and then changed to English and ended up with a degree in English. And so post college, I just dabbled around in theater arts for about a year, cleaned horse stalls for part of that time too. And a year after, my mom said, "What are you doing with your life? You need to get it together."
Like fun to me. I don't know.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
fun. I love the theater arts and that's been a huge, it's had a very healing place in my life.
Mhm.
And so yeah, but my mom was concerned that I would just be doing shows and serving tables and cleaning stalls. And so she's like, "What are you going to do?" And I didn't know what one did with a degree in English besides perhaps teach. And so I then entered a master's in secondary education program. I was in that for about 8 months of the year that would take to complete before I dropped out for a variety of reasons. But then yeah, I was back into just theater, picking up random teaching theater arts jobs. Eventually, that led to the Great Lakes Theater Festival School actor teacher residency program. So for 2 years, I traveled with another actor and we taught Shakespeare in the schools and stage combat and a bunch of other things, as well as other classic theater pieces. And then after that was when I was like, what do I want to really do now? And that's when I went and trained to be a therapeutic riding instructor, was certified at the advanced level after that program in New Hampshire, got my first job at a path center with my first horse, was hemorrhaging money, paying for board and trying to survive on that. Some other gigs came my way. I got a 3-week stint on a cruise ship being a magician's assistant, and then another 3 weeks doing a opening act for a show in Vegas. Um, and so during that time, like I lost that first job at the Path Center due to some conflicts. But while I was on the cruise ship, got the job offer to become the riding instructor at Valley Riding's Brecksville stable. So did that. So then finally got a full-time job where I could afford to live, have my horse, and was teaching public riding lessons and volunteer coordinating for their therapeutic riding. And then about 3 years into that was when I started to question, okay, what is next? And realizing that a lot of what I was seeing in adaptive riding ended up being more social, emotional, behavioral health, and as well as showing up sometimes in my public riding lessons too, and in different degrees, and just working being more supportive for people who are bringing their own anxieties or things to lessons. And the mental health field was not too foreign to me. My dad was a psychiatrist, so it's sort of something that I had always been aware of, but not necessarily social work. And so I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but knew something mental healthy. I went to volunteer at an organization called The Gathering Place in Cleveland, which offers free support for individuals, families, and friends whose lives have been touched by cancer, because that's something that's very important to me. And that volunteer interview ended up getting me a job as their animal camp coordinator. They were doing a summer camp where they partner with a variety of different animals, one week being horse week, but other weeks being different animals from puppies to kittens to wild animals through the natural history rehabilitation. And so that program was run by a social worker and a child life specialist, I think also. Oh, man. Was she also a social worker? I'm not sure. But anyways, those two women were phenomenally impactful in this idea of, wow, okay, we can take mental health, but not make it a drudgery. No, drudgery is a strong word. Make it enjoyable, right? Not make it feel so clinical, right? And that we can do it in a variety of environments, and that we can trust that if we set up a supportive space with, supportive adults and these novel experiences, kids will be able to start to, treat themselves in a way. You kind of put all the raw materials out there, and how wonderfully healing that could be. And doing it in a way that promoted not just, yes, you can process what it's like to be a kid whose life has been touched by cancer, who's had a family member's lives touched by cancer. You can also, while doing that, build mastery in another area, right? So they were learning some pretty cool things they could do to support these animals and develop that relationship. And then at the end, of each week, there would be a family day where they could showcase what they've learned, right? And really be seen as the expert on something. And so yeah, that job really got me jazzed about the idea of combining mental health with animal assisted therapies or activities. And so yeah, then I went and became a social worker. And then
Why a social worker though?
yeah.
That's quite niche. Like there were other you could have become a psychologist, you could have become a psychotherapist, you could have, there are other avenues you could have gone. And a lot of people within the sort of equine assisted world do. Why social work?
I went and talked to different department heads at Cleveland State University and tried to get a feel of what the different perspectives were. And this is at least my understanding on it. It's not to say it's the only way to look at it or that it's the right way to look at it. But, when I knew I didn't want to do a doctorate, so that was kind of like, for me, it was like, okay, I wasn't going to go try to do the PhD in psychology, certainly not medical school. So then it was, what can you have a master's degree in and still practice clinically, which took it to counseling or social work. And I, for my feel on it was that counseling was going to be yeah, like, kind of analyzing and really, like, the inner part of the or sort of siloed on the person. I'm not saying that's the way it always is, but social work really looked at, like, okay, how does this person interact with systems in their environment, right? And I liked that idea of it just felt less pathologizing, even though you're still diagnosing. And also the people who I met again through animal camp being social workers, I really respected and valued how they seemed to work and be able to balance, that mental health piece, but also figuring out how you can adapt and modify environments and systems. And so yeah, it was never just about like that person who's having a problem. It was like really looking at through a wider lens. And I think that's a little bit more of an orientation that social work tends to draw from is again, like, looking through systems, looking at the person in relation to their environment, looking at various ways you can create change that can end up being supportive, not just, trying to get the person to change themselves. And so that's where why I gravitated towards it. And yeah, so then out of grad school, I got my first job at a larger community mental health center, and they contracted with schools. So I was like a traveling school based therapist as well as doing home based work. And one of the schools I ended up being placed at was a school that specialized in providing like an alternative education setting for kids who were not thriving in more traditional settings. And many of these children were diagnosed with autism, amongst other things. And they ended up offering me, instead of contracting with the agency, they offered me a full time job to come and be their school based therapist. So I ended up doing that for about 3 years and then moved to Texas. So anyways, right from going to grad school and social working and starting trying to get my clinical hours, there wasn't a lot of, I left the university with my graduate degree thinking, okay, I'm going to start making like animal camps all over the world, like or all over this area. But there wasn't really like a job for that. And so you're just kind of getting your clinical work in whichever way you can. You're at supervision hours. So there was not a ton of animal opportunities. But thankfully, once I started working at that school, I was allowed to sort of create some stuff. So while I couldn't bring horses to the classroom, we ended up incorporating a Shakespeare program. So I had the actor teacher friends from my old job. We worked and brought a theater arts residency week there. And that was really, really awesome to see how Shakespeare could be performed as well as other classic pieces with the variety of, we had, ages, I think, ooh, 4 to like 21, 22 at that school. And some speaking, speaking, some non-speaking students, and how we could, how theater was something that no matter how you communicated, you could perform, and how timeless those stories were. That was super cool. And then we also did a therapy dog program. So different people who had therapy dogs came and we did like a bi-weekly, I think 8-session therapy dog thing, which worked out so well. Then I ended up adopting my golden retriever and getting him certified as a therapy dog, and he became the school therapy dog. So I don't lots of different weird things. But then when I moved to Texas, that was what I told myself. I was like, okay, now I can get back into trying to meld horses with, with social work. But
It's interesting. I met you, I remember actually, at this dressage barn, White Fences in Mena, Texas, which was the next town on from Elgin, Texas, where we were based. And we were there for, I can't remember if we were taking a.
I think you had Christoph Hess there as a class.
That's right. That's right. We brought Christoph Hess,
Mhm.
who, for those listeners who don't know who Christoph Hess is or was, he was at that time the head of education for the FN, which is the German equivalent of the USEF or the British Horse Society or whatever. And we brought him over for a clinic. That's right. And we organized for him to come over to the barn where you were boarding your horse, I think. And I ran into you and I had one of those gut feelings. I was like, oh, this person is one of those people that can like do the lot, whether it's on the horse side or the human side. And I remember we had this initial conversation where I sort of said, would you kind of like to come check out the interesting shit that we do? And you kind of went, well, maybe, and then
Yeah, it's my classic response.
and then
Even when Cody proposed to me, I was like,
Cody, again, for listeners that don't know, Betsy is her husband. Yeah, I could see that. Yeah. But then you came out and you kind of looked around and went, yeah, okay. And next thing I knew, you're running our program. I remember recognizing this kind of versatility in you, which was sort of a gut feeling because I didn't know your background at that point. I just saw that you rode really well and had this kind of open heart and inquiring mind. And then I subsequently found out about your, therapeutic and social work background. Before we get to how you kind of melded the orthodox with the unorthodox, which was path with Horseboy, and then out of that helped us to build Athena, which is now called Takin, which we'll talk about why the name changed. Before we go there, I'm interested in your take on theatre arts. Why is this kind of crucial? Why is this so good to have a background in theatre arts if you're going to deal with equine assisted stuff? And then you subsequently went from there talking about Shakespeare for people who don't speak, which is counterintuitive because Shakespeare's all about language. So just talk to us a little bit about that before we go to the next stage.
Okay. So I think the first one was theater arts and how it can be helpful for people in
Mm-hmm.
equine work. I Well, I guess I've never thought about how that's informed by equine work as much, but I think one of the ways it could be helpful is that it's really about listening and responding, if any, and
Okay.
to some degree, right? So if you're doing any type of performance, so much of it is, well, being in the moment, right? And trying to truly understand what whoever you're sharing the stage with, or whatever the even is happening audience wise, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, my theater career has been their theatrical stuff has been from doing, some stuff I'd like to forget. That's them in various youth theaters too. Not like to forget, but like things that like someone would see like, oh, we found this clip, I'd be like, oh Lord.
Let's call it a learning curve. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Not because I feel like the performance is bad, but like I'm talking like, I don't know, we did like and my senior year in high school, I was in the Velveteen Rabbit. I was one of the cool bunnies. So I'm like dressed in this giant rabbit costume, like singing the funny bunny rag and hopping around. I thought it was like the coolest thing ever,
How does the funny bunny rag go?
But you want the choreography
Yes, please.
too? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you can't just put that out there and not do it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Well, let me see. I don't know if I have enough space I can deal with this camera angle, but and
Okay.
there's 2 other bunnies with me, right? I was
Okay. One on each side. Are you the middle bunny?
Yeah, of course. And this again, if you have the video, I might not have it right, but so we're telling the Velveteen Rabbit how to be a real rabbit, you know. And it goes, just perk your ears up and hear the beat and tell those rabbit feet. You can't see my feet to bounce along and don't be such a don't ever stop whining your bumper on its bunny bunny ride. And there's more, but I think that's like an
Wow.
example.
You were absolutely on pitch, on
Oh, yeah.
key, and on point there.
Well, as you know, the funny bunny rag so well. I could have just made that up. But I think there's just that ability to kind of surrender and have fun too, right? Because like no one want so yeah, doing things like that, working with other human beings to tell and create and imagine stories. And then also, yeah, it requires you to have to be present to
Mm.
surrender to the emotions that are showing up.
Mm.
Maybe not fighting, but moving through them. And I think
Mhm.
that's what when I said, like, yeah, theater really saved me or healed me. I think that's what it was. It was something that,
Not fighting the emotion, but surrendering to it and moving through it. I love that.
yeah, thank you. And it's a safe container though, right? And something that I always found weird was sometimes people be like, "Oh, it's so brave to be like to do that or on stage. I That's so courageous." And I remember thinking like, I don't for me, I disagreed because I felt allowing myself to experience emotions in theater felt so much safer than life because I knew where the story was
You see,
going.
that is, I think, what I was trying to get to. I think that I don't think that, I know that in the experience that I've had with shamanism, for example,
Mm,
a shaman takes on a role
mm,
and they take on the role as the healer, but they also take on the role as you're suffering and many other roles.
yeah,
You, as the person, one, as the person going for healing, also takes on a role. And that these roles are not like negative masking trying to damp down your authentic self. It's more like the type of practical masking that you might do, for example, to get in camouflage or to actually put a mask on so that someone didn't recognize you in a situation where if they did recognize you, you might be in trouble. Or let's say you're going to hunt a deer, it might not be a terrible idea to put on a deer skin and a pair of antlers.
mhm.
It's all about agency. The idea of putting on roles, I think I've definitely seen this over the years for the populations that we work with. When they learn how to do this in exactly as you said, safe containers like a show or a play date or a therapy session. I like to call them play dates, where they can then trust that the people around them, the facilitators, you, me, will go with it. This then translates to a certain confidence that they can go out in the world
Yeah.
and function, even while suffering from imposter syndrome or fear or anxiety or all the things that we all suffer from. But of course, if you're on the spectrum or going through some mental health crisis situation, it's going to be much more acute. So I love the fact that you can bring theatre arts to that. Do you feel that something along the lines of theatre arts, role playing, shape shifting should be a part of the training for this kind of work? Because because you're so good at it, right? I mean, you run our
Yeah.
program, like
Well,
you ran our program, and I watched you, I observed you, and you would just be able to meld yourself to not just the individual, but to the groups that came in
mhm.
and bring out the best in them and get them doing things that they, I remember seeing a group of kids from the foster programs in Austin, and I observed a bunch of times you being able to get through that anger and that hurt and bring them to creativity, self advocacy through playing roles. Why isn't this taught? Why isn't this, whether it's with horses or whether it's not with horses, why isn't this a sort of
Well,
standard thing in mental health stuff?
oh, well, I mean, there are avenues of mental health, I suppose, where you lean into that. I mean, and there's even some treatment modalities that emphasize, the various roles or various parts within a person. But
Agree.
yeah, but as you were talking about like this and to tie it back to adaptive or equine assisted services, like in a way, it's almost already there, right? The structure, because like when you're studying, you're like the instructor in training, like you literally are like labeled, or you show up as instructor, what have you, right? And so I mean, the parts and the performance is almost already there. Even I remember during the women who ran the program, Boo Martin, who was a big name within the path community, as well as one of the founders of Equine Facilitated Mental Health, that like offshoot little side, not side program, but like they have the equine assisted learning, mental health, vaulting, these little subsets you can get certified in. But Boo was one of the people who kind of pioneered pushing that into the industry. And that's why I chose to study with her. But I remember her having this thing of being like, you're not just teaching, right? There are people who are listening. There are people who parents want to hear, like, when you're teaching, it's not just to the student. Like, think of the volunteers, think of the people watching, think of who might be coming through. And she's like, everything is for everyone. And I don't, and then that made a lot of sense to me of being, maybe it did translate in my brain, like, oh, this is, yeah, the arena is a stage as well. And that was, and sometimes
The
it,
arena is a stage as well. That's an interesting comment.
okay. Yeah. But I mean, it kind of, if you think about it,
And
because
I think you're dead right.
yeah, there's people who watch, like, even when I'm riding, you ride your own horse or working with your own horse, there are always, everyone's got a side act from
Yeah,
everybody
sure.
sometimes at barns. But yeah, yeah, what you bring, what you put out there does ripple through. And that was even, the large program up in Texas that I worked at, it was set up like open, very open space, as you can have the luxury of that in the climate that is Texas. But, so people walking down aisles could have direct lines of sight to what was happening. There were chairs set up along the perimeter, right, where people would sit. Literally on the nights I would teach the veteran programs, we had our little like Britney Spears mic headsets, and what you said was getting amplified. So why not make it something that could be that a person, whether on the horse or sitting in a chair or walking alongside supporting the rider, that they could all get something from it, right? And I think that's always been sort of the the things I think of is, yeah, kind of what you're saying is like we create these containers, but what can you experience in a container? And I see my role as like, how do I start to create those transitional bridges, right? So that always thinking like, how does this riding or horsemanship groundwork thing, how do you how can you find that personal connection? And how does that then support maybe showing up differently outside, or believing that there's more, that there's more you can
Mm.
easily show outside of this space. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe that, yeah, I haven't really thought of that. So anyways, point of why this could be helpful in training, I think we've just said a few things. I don't think it could be helpful. But what theater does is it requires you, again, like I said, to be present, to truly listen, to go off of what you're getting, not just to stay, stuck in one way. I mean, sometimes in a show, yes, you have your script, right? But how you say it will be changed based on what's happening. And also to kind of continually be thinking, okay, yes, and this, yes, and this, right? That's like this typical improv rule of like, yes, and, but theater is one of those places where the second you start thinking, no, 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 everything falls apart, right? You've just,
Right. No, absolutely. Improv, show must go on. It's so interesting. I started working in the last year with a group in London called Chicken Shed, who are a theatre that started in the Chicken Shed
Mhm.
and now are a big deal. They put on shows that are like Broadway quality. You shouldn't be able to put those shows on really with amateur, junior actors who are various degrees of special needs, and yet they do. And we might be putting something together with the horseboy story with them. I've observed how they work, and it's so interesting now. They have this degree program through the university system in the UK, where I think they're the only people that offer, is it theatre arts for special needs in the special needs context
Hmm.
as a degree program. And it's kind of genius because, of course, the people who are teaching it are people who've come through their programs and their performances who themselves have various types of special needs.
Hmm.
And one sees that it works so well that when you go to see one of those shows, it's not that you forget that the people have special needs, it's that the special needs that the person has enhances the show. I do feel that there is naturally, and for very good reasons, a sort of desire within the equine assisted thing, within any kind of mental health thing, to try to help people to integrate with the mainstream. And that is a worthy cause, and it is necessary. And at the same time, it's not the mainstream. You know, one is outside of the mainstream de facto in the work that we do. And the difficulty now, as it's becoming more accepted and better funded, is that one is expected to now kind of present it in a mainstreamy sort of a way. And it's nice that we're all coming from the hippie margins into the mainstream. I mean, you were a bit more mainstream than I was because you were with Path, but, you know, I could not have been more marginal. And now suddenly governments and insurance companies and so forth are paying for our services. And now we have to more and more, you know, tick those boxes and present ourselves as if we were mainstream. And for all the reasons that, you know, are inevitable and good. And at the same time, the magic is not in the mainstream. And I think to a large degree, you personify that, which is that, you know, you still perform. I know you still perform. I've watched you perform, you know, just in performances outside of anything to do with equine, anything to do with, you know. And I got it. It's like, yes, that is the ammunition that gives you the ability to show somebody else how to perform in a way that serves them and does not drain them, so that they can then use that performance to go into the mainstream world, into the shark-infested waters of neurotypical humanity and swim. So you're a senior path instructor, you're a horseboy instructor. You're also helped us to get what was called the Athena program going, what's now called the Takim program going. What, in your perfect world, would you like to see from theatre arts, performing arts, in this equine assisted world as a sort of a basic curriculum? It wouldn't matter whether you were going path, horseboy, igala, whatever. There would just be a sort of a psychic theatre thing that ought to run through the whole. It should just be a theme that runs. What would that look like, and how would it be taught in your perfect world? If you're in the equine assisted field, or if you're considering a career in the equine assisted field, you might want to consider taking one of our 3 neuroscience-backed equine assisted programs. Horseboy Method, now established for 20 years, is the original equine assisted program specifically designed for autism, mentored by and developed in conjunction with Dr. Temple Grandin and many other neuroscientists. We work in the saddle with younger children helping them create oxytocin in their bodies and neuroplasticity in the brain. It works incredibly well. It's now in about 40 countries. Check it out. If you're working without horses, you might want to look at movement method, which gets a very, very similar effect, but can also be applied in schools, in homes. If you're working with families, you can give them really tangible exercises to do at home that will create neuroplasticity when they're not with you. Finally, we have taquine equine integration. If you know anything about our programs, you know that we need a really high standard of horsemanship in order to create the oxytocin in the body of the person that we're working with, child or adult. So this means we need to train a horse in collection, but this also has a really beneficial effect on the horse's well-being. And it also ends your time conflict where you're wondering, oh my gosh, how am I going to condition my horses and maintain them and give them what they need, as well as serving my clients? Taquine equine integration, aimed at a more adult client base, absolutely gives you this.
Well, that's a big question. What I liked with how Athena evolved and now to Keen, at least my interaction with it, right? What I liked was that it was a framework of the classical master's system that you were applying to improving quality of horses to be able to do their therapeutic work, right? And so I think it was kind of looking at, yeah, what is the story of this system, right? Okay, well, it was based in military training. All right. Well, where is that showing? I think when you're kind of spitballing these ideas, okay, well, it should who how does this connect then with what's happening? And so it was sort of like, okay, military training, okay, veteran. Like for me, it's like connected to veteran programming, right? And then being like, yeah, there is a bit of a gap because sometimes we're limited on horses that can successfully partner under saddle, right? For a variety of reasons, especially when you're dealing with adults. And if your center has predominantly, some tough, scrappy ponies, but not, or some pretty older arthritic horses, right? And so yeah, I think it was just kind of considering like, how can, if we take this classic story, much like a classic Shakespearean text, right? How do we cast it in this new environment? Right? And who steps into these roles and why can't we make the veterans the stars of the show, right? Why can't they and what, be have their co-star the horse, right? And have them create something, a new story together, right? A new story about movement, about 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 possibility, right? And so I I think for any equine program, maybe what theater offers is that idea of you don't have to come up with something totally new. It's like, how do we find a new lens to look at what is known? How do we get creative in what we can add to the stories, right? And And that I think is what was so cool to see evolve with that first group of veterans who helped, you know, so generously, as well as the horses we partner with, they were just generous to go along with this idea of, hey, like, let's try this. Let's try this thing, right? And let me create the scene, right? Here's the history. Here's why it came on, and what they would bring to it. Some of the best practitioners of the work ended up being the veterans who flew helicopters, right? Because they understood this idea of thinking in multi-planes of movement
That's so interesting.
and balance and when things, were on and off and how yeah. And I think, what they brought to it and how they shared that knowledge with the group, with the horse, with myself, right? that took my understanding of the work to a totally different level as well.
Mm.
And there, yeah, and so I think it's that curiosity, right, of and creativity and embracing, being willing to step slightly into the unknown.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's really a prescriptive thing that it could look like, because each program in place has their own strengths. And maybe that's where the challenge is, is we're all trying something that I'm always constantly like checking in with myself is, when I have with your feeling for whatever reason, not enoughness or depleted or just
Mhm.
stuck like in the bog of sometimes looking out and being like, oh, that thing, if I can do that thing, I'm going to be like, if I can be that person or that program or that thing or that training, right? And sometimes that is the thing to do, but sometimes you also just thinking of being like, okay, well, what is it? Well, kind of, what am I trying to resolve for myself by seeking that out? And do I already possess what is needed to do that? Right? Do I already have that? And yeah, maybe that I'm not sure where I'm going with this, but
Well, I wrote something down
yeah.
as you were I wrote a bunch of things down actually. But
Mm,
you a few minutes ago, you said, "Create a new story together."
yeah.
I wonder if that's kind of the missing thing that actually unites all of the supposedly opposing, of course they're not, but people might think that they are, equine assisted modalities or disciplines or whatever, where what is it that we're all actually doing? We are creating a new story together, but it's not explicitly said. So one can get diverted or, yeah,
Yeah.
negatively diverted by details of saying, well, I do this modality, I do horseboy, or I do Athena, which is now Tikina, or I do Path, or I do Igala, or I do, lifemanship, or whatever. And actually, what we're all doing is the same thing. What we're all doing is, I think you put your finger on it, we're creating a new story together. But there might be ways in which to do that that are quite a bit specific for certain population types, that mean that if people were to carry over from one discipline to another, one modality to another, one niche to another, they could do it very happily if they kept front and center in their mind, we're creating a new story together, whether it's for the horse or whether it's for the human. And I know that that isn't, sadly, how many people in our industry think. But I have noticed that there's a growing impatience with the lawmakers and the gatekeepers of funding and so on, with our endless factionalism, where we bicker with each other, in the same way that people in the horse industry do, because we shouldn't really be doing that. And I've often wondered, what is the common denominator between us all in the equine assisted world? And I mean, you could say it's healing, but I love this idea. You said it. I'm quoting you back to yourself. Create a new story together. And if you're going to do that, then it might be a good idea to have some tools, whether it's theater arts, whether it's old masters training, whether it's neuro, neuroscience, whether it's, presumably it's all these things. And that we as the professionals in this field surely could naturally share our trade secrets experiences and,
Sure.
you know,
Yeah.
yet we are still hovering on the brink of it. I was just last month at a gathering in Ireland, hosted, paid for by Horse Sport Ireland, which is amazing because Horse Sport Ireland is effectively the USEF. It's the FN, it's the BHS, and they have correctly measured that the equine assisted field is the only really growing field in the equine world at the moment. And they wanted us all from a bunch of different disciplines or modalities to present what we did without selling our thing or trashing the other person's thing. And it's really interesting because we had a bunch of people in the same room who had to behave themselves, who normally are really at loggerheads with each other.
Mhm.
And because they weren't allowed to present that way, what came across was quite a coherent, multifaceted front of we help to create a new story together for people. It just might look a bit like this or it might look a bit like that, depending on what type of person you have. You've been in it for a long time. You're an instructor in our modalities. You're an instructor in PAR. How should it change? Like, what what should happen to bring us all together for the greater good?
Mhm. Well, I think man, it's being able to there's it's so hard to say in an abstract way how it should change, but I think just being I organizationally, I'm not sure, I'm not really working at that level. Perhaps someday, but individually, I suppose I can speak on that, and perhaps there's something there. I think individually, it is really that self-awareness, knowing what your strengths are, being okay with that, right? Like being okay with not having to be everything is something that can be difficult, especially in a work environment where there is so much variety, right? And
Mm.
so much different stuff. And that it is okay to, much like with horses, right? Like, you have your specialist in POF, you have your specialist in certain things. They might not love your specialist for jumping, right? Like the horses that stand up and say, yeah, I will teach anyone how to do this thing because I love it, right? I think that it is okay for you as an individual to know, right? What feels maybe not forever, but for now. Where do I feel like this is where my talents thrive and shine, right? Like that I feel very secure and safe in working this way. Not to say that I can't stretch, right? It's not to say to play comfortable, it's not to say to play small, but it's to say like this this is within what I can do. This is within what I can tolerate right now. This is within this in a place that I can work where I can, meet the needs of the people who show up in that, And so I think sometimes that's helpful is just to feel like you can honestly assess that for yourself or get help from someone to assess that for you and understand identifying that what it is where you do your best work and then yeah, where are those stretch places and where do you find the support to grow in that area? And I don't know if, that's something that space was made for that inquiry for me it, immediately, Sometimes you look at the job descriptions of a ride center and it's like you will do everything, right?
Yeah.
And for everyone. And yeah, there is resources are thin or with horses that come in, right? And like that resources can be tight, and we want that. We so desperately want that to be the reality, but that might not be it. And what do we destroy as we try to force that?
Mm.
And so, yeah, I think as we allow individuals to, in every aspect, from horses to the instructors to the participants, just to be able to show up as who they are and build from there, right? Not try
Yeah.
to be something else or pretend you like it.
It's tricky in the horsey world, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it comes, as you know, we've inherited it from the military, and military is about conform and conform, although there's a threat of violence,
Yeah.
and that this still underpins the way in which we relate to each other within the horse world, whether it's the therapeutic world, sport world, or any other world. I feel that has to change. And I do, I'm optimistic. I feel it is changing. But we can't really do the job
Yeah.
unless
Yeah.
we actually appreciate each other, you know?
Well, yeah. And I think appreciate what each person can offer. And I think that's where, maybe this is where art is so, in whatever way it shows up in your life.
Mm.
For me, theater arts, equestrian art, circus art, you know, that there is, you appreciate people because the thing doesn't belong to you, right? Like nobody owns the idea of horses. Nobody owns the idea of therapy. Like, right?
That's so true.
And
Yeah.
so I think if you just realize like you have this finite time to be part of this story, to contribute what you can, and maybe it'll change the world, maybe it'll just impact someone's life, but like that's enough. Right? Isn't that enough? And so I think that's, there is no, art doesn't create a creativity. Art is the place that I love to go back to because there's no place for hierarchy or power or that, right?
Except
And
that the art world is full of that. But yes,
well, but to some degree, but not at its core, right?
absolutely. Yeah.
Not yeah, sometimes you're like in the sake of survival or trying to push yourself or brand or be or like have whatever,
Mm.
right? But at its core, right? It's not, you couldn't, if you could truly sell it, like, because like there, as someone who works at that, like there is a thing, like it's that intangible quality
Yeah.
of that in the moment connection, that feel, that attunement, that's
I think we could put a name on it. I think the name is love. If you're trying to tell a story, let's go outside of horses for a moment. That story is only going to have any resonance if it somehow is about love. All good stories are love stories, and love doesn't have to mean romantic love. It's, the infinite expressions of love. Because what we know, I think, is that life is love. The tree loves the mycelium network. The mycelium network loves the tree and the soil. The soil loves the tree and the mycelium network. The rain loves, or this is where I think working with horses is healing for those of us that do it. Is nature always wants to bring us back to a state of harmony. There is the glass half empty way of looking at the world, is to say no, nature is entropy and it's always in decay. Yeah, but then when it decays, it reconstitutes itself and creates Betsy, or you know one of your horses, or the person that you're working with, or that tree. And then when that tree dies, it becomes another thing. But that isn't a bad thing. That's a loving thing, actually. If when you die, you become the soil, and then you become the thing that, you know. So I do feel it's about love. And I do feel that horses bring us back to that, even when we're almost willfully forgetting it and using the horse, projecting the horse as a way to compete with each other or, you know,
Mhm.
cause each other harm in some way. When you and I helped teach other pioneer Athena, you know, we, we then got sued by some people who said, no, we're Athena. And actually we were both Athena at the same time. It just like literally within a week of each other, we'd done the trademarks, but one in North America, one in Europe. And the European ones approached us with such aggression. It was so interesting to me. I was like, well, why didn't you just talk to us? Of course we would figure it out because we're all here for the same reason. We all are here to try to lovingly help people like my son, who's sitting on the other side of the courtyard right now because I killed him with too many chores today. Who you know very well, Rowan.
Mhm.
Um, I do feel that that has to change if we, as a sort of equine assisted world, are going to evolve to the next stage, where like you as a social worker, where we're being prescribed in the same way that doctors are now prescribing nature, thank God, to people and so on, the stuff that actually works. As long as we're so obviously factional with each other, people notice and then they don't take us seriously because they go, you're just a bunch of idiots arguing with each other,
Mm.
bunch of horsey snobs. We've got to break out of that. We've got to stop that. And I think that you're one of those people that I've observed who just automatically treads that line. When we, with Horseboy, began, we were astonished at the aggression with which Path, Nara at that time, met us. And I don't know if you remember this, back in 2018, I was giving a talk at Denver University and I talked about that. And I said, I was saddened by it as an autism dad because it made me feel that really the people in the field just were more concerned with protecting their territory than with helping people like myself. Yeah. What I didn't know was that the board of Path was sitting in the audience at that time, and we got that email saying, well, should we talk? And I thought, well, this is great. Yes, absolutely. Let's talk. And then I asked you to be on that call because you were, a Path person and an us person too. And on that call, there was the person who was in charge said, well, we've never badmouthed you. And I remember saying, why are we even having this conversation? Of course you have. You have. But the real reason is why. Like, what is your beef? Truly, what is your beef? We'd like to know. And I don't know if you remember, they said, well, we think you're dangerous. And we said, well, why? Why are we dangerous? And they said, well, because of the back riding, because you ride with a kid in front of you in horseboy. And we said, yeah, but look, if it's dangerous, I'm going to touch wood here, but why have we not had an accident in, back then it was 15 years, now it's 20 years. Like, why, what is this based on? Where is this danger that you're talking about? And then they said, well, because when we did it, we had accidents. And then the penny dropped. I was like, I see. Yes, of course. Right. Because you don't prepare the horse's back. You don't prepare the horse. You don't prepare the rider. You don't prepare the whole thing. So therefore, yes, if you did it, it probably would be dangerous. So you should stick to what you do. We should do what we do and we should complement each other. And Athena kind of grew out of that, really.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think I can't imagine how painful that must have been to be very excited, when you were first realizing what helped Rowan and wanting to offer that. It's probably very painful. I don't know that exact
It was
situation,
surprising.
but
It
but
was,
yeah. I mean, surprising, but yeah, like any type of any type of messaging that can be for me, and I've been in situations, work situations, as I work where it's the idea when the takeaway you get can sometimes be like, what? who you are and what you do is wrong.
Mm.
That that can be really hard to hear. And I don't always handle that feedback well. But
I wish I
but
could say I did. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I it's something I'd like to get better at. But I think, and again, ultimately we can kind of try to find where we connect. And I think I recall in the call, like at least the one place we were able to connect was this idea that we wanted to that a sound horse, equine welfare was one of the
Yes.
key things that would promote safety for people, regardless of what way we're working.
Right. Yes. Equine
And
welfare,
yeah,
a strong back, a happy
and
horse.
so,
Yeah.
right. And I think, those are the things. If we can all at least whatever whatever ego stuff we have to get through,
Mm,
right? But to figure out where is that connection, right? Where is that thing that we both value, that we both are united on? And that is one thing that I will say has started to come more and more up into the industry, at least in my awareness.
mm,
Even within, whatever pleasure or competitive riding discipline, right? Is this
mm,
idea,
mm.
something that we haven't centered enough is the welfare of our horses, and
Right.
how do we start?
You're dead right because we're all under scrutiny now. The whole social licensing thing.
Yeah.
It's not sport people; it's us too in the equine assisted field.
Right, right. And that scrutiny can be challenging, right? Because sometimes you are doing the best you can with the resources you have, and that is okay. And not everyone can have the textbook perfect setup, but you do what you can to the best of your ability. And I it's something that's interesting is, organizationally things that or on an individual level again, because that's where I work. Is this idea of, can we ask ourselves the question of like, what is it I want? And what am I willing to do to not get that? Right. And because we're always yeah,
What am
foot
I
on the
willing
gas and
to
our
do to
foot on
not
the
get
brake.
that? That's
Yeah. And it's when and that's where we start to come up with those stories, right? If I say, okay, well, I want, you know, I don't even know, maybe my horse to be able to do this thing, right?
mm,
What am I willing to do to not get that? And it's like, you start to have to really sit with those hard actions that you take that oppose what you say it is you want. And then you have to recognize, okay, well, I have to reevaluate one of these things. And then the question is too, whether you realize what you're doing to not get it. This idea, and then this line of inquiry, it's in this book called Immunity to Change, which I thought was such a cool title. And it's like, what are the commitments I've made that support those things that, those, what am I committed to? That is preventing me from getting that thing that I want.
right. Yeah. What hill am I dying on
Yeah, yeah, and
when the actual job is on the other hill? Yeah.
mhm. And so I think maybe regardless of who we are in this industry, it's like, okay, well, if we say we want welfare and we want programming that really helps or supports participants to get XYZ, right?
Mm,
If we
mm.
say this is what we want, what what are we doing that prevents it? What are we willing to continue doing? And then like,
Yeah,
why?
but
What
that means that one has to admit one sometimes is preventing it.
Yeah, which
That's
is
a
a
hard
hard
thing to admit, right?
you're right, right. But I think, at least for me, like, I think when we start to lead, maybe not being like, you have to pull out your skeletons, right? I was like, you're mine. Like, this is where I've failed. This is how I like even in some of my clinical work, like the idea of self-disclosure therapeutically is a real touchy subject. And, I don't believe in burdening your clients with stuff, but I think that sometimes, yeah, like to some degree, being able to not be afraid to share,
Yeah,
where
that's an interesting one, isn't it? The point of vulnerability, because let's say you're in the addiction world, when you're going through anything like that, the only person who's qualified to deal with you is a therapist that isn't. recovering addict of the
Mhm.
same thing that you've got. Otherwise, they have nothing to show you other than a bunch of opinions. And in the course of that, in your average AA meeting, everything is shared. And it's interesting and it works.
Mhm.
And yet it's relegated from the other therapeutic modalities.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that is interesting. I had that makes me think of, I had a job interview, or when it was not probably a candidate. I think they were doing me a favor of a person who suggested I interview this job. But it was to work as a therapist for kids who, again, had family members or people that were close to whose lives were touched by cancer. And I remember being in the interview, and one of the questions they asked me, because I had shared something about, my history as a child who had a family member touched by cancer and ended up dying from cancer when I was still, I guess I was technically an adult at 19. But anyways, from 12 to 19, it was a pretty significant presence in our lives. And I really be like, how is that going to impact? And the idea is like in a negative way, like how you be that's going to impact your work, right? But not seeing it and as a strength per se. And I forget how the question was phrased. And I'm just being like, I'm not sure. Like I to where I am currently, I process the best I can and continue to work on it. I was like, but what I do know is that as a 12-year-old, I would have loved to have met somebody who who would have been able to say, like, yeah, when I was your age, this was going on. And
Mm,
it's really hard. But like, and even to see that they got through it, right?
mm,
And I
mm.
think, yeah, it's interesting why sometimes that's, and I get too, like, it's a fine line because there are people who do dump and maybe do put too much out there. And it's again, we're not, it's not a one-upsmanship of stories, right? It's not a suffering competition, but it's that connection and that true empathy
Mm.
and like not trying to eclipse someone's experience with your own, but just being like, I get that this is hard and this is my experience of it. and and for whatever I've gained from it, if I have something within that to offer you.
Right. Well, I mean,
Uh,
you've been coy, but for the right reasons about saying, what your involvement was with having a family member that was, touched by cancer. Is it all right for me to say or to ask you to say who that was? Because I think knowing you as I do, that axe through your heart spouted a wellspring of compassion that has, informed everything that you've done. So why beat about the bush? Because there'll be people listening, there'll be people watching who are going through it, or their kids are going through it.
Right.
So is it all right to talk about that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So tell us who it was and how it affected you.
Yeah, it was my father, and he was sick. I now I'm confused as to the story of it all. At least as I understood it, when I was 12, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. My mom will sometimes now say it
Oh,
was just outside, just small intestine, but anyways, intestinal cancer. And he went through surgery. So he was at that time 42. And he had, surgery and then was in remission for about 7 years. And when he was 49, it came back and had metastasized. And, I think less than a year, he passed away. So it was 27 years, the 17th of this December. And so yeah, it's been a long time. So I was, yeah, from 12 to 19. I was 19 when he died. And that definitely does in great and not so great ways. It does. It changes you. You have your life narrative is very much like pre-death and after death. to some degree.
Mm.
And so, yeah, just how you make sense of the world, how you move forward is impacted.
How do you make sense of the world and move forward?
I don't know.
Mm.
It's a
That's a
daily
great
thing,
answer.
right?
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
daily thing. And I think, again, that can be terrifying, but again,
Mm.
or you can realize that, like, yeah, every day is you're creating the story, right?
Yeah.
That if I don't have such a grip, I mean, I was about to say death grip, which isn't that interesting, right? Is it a grip that results after having death that's so close to you, right? But like if you can just, yeah, just see how it shows up and move with that for your day. Cause there are days that are easy. There are days where it hits. There are days where it, comes and goes.
Yeah.
But I think, you're consistently making meaning of it. And I think in the past I used to think, oh, you make, meaning and it's done. Good job. But now I think it is every day I make meaning of the loss. And that is okay. And that is what's required, at least of me, of how I carry it with me. And so yeah. And that's never done. And I think once I let go of that
Mm.
idea of thinking that there'd be a resolution or an endpoint or something, you know. But yeah. And I think some of the meaning is, yeah, how do I remember, and in that remembering, re-embodying of who
Mm.
my dad was, right? How do I
Mm.
remember that? How do I carry that? How do I keep that alive with me in some way? So yeah, that's I think how I do it. In some ways well, in some ways not so well. Doesn't mean that I don't also highly recommend sobbing in the shower or or crumpling it
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
yeah, like that's all can be part of it too. But yeah, but I think too
Well, it
being able to
presumably must be. Yes.
sharing that story, right? Because yeah, we can make meaning for ourselves, but then yeah, we heal through connection and community with others. So no.
Have you, in the course of the work that you've done with the equine assisted work, encountered a lot of people who are dealing with grief?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, gosh, there's so much grief, right? Maybe not like, the dead dad's club, which is
Hmm.
sometimes interesting. It was really it's interesting sometimes those periods where you connect with someone quickly and you later on realize, oh wow, your father has died too. You had no idea why, but there's just some type of resonance. Uh,
Hmm.
and but yeah, I think there is so much grief involved with horses that people bring, and I like things that I've heard. Just I think that there's a there's so many friends who have horses or maybe got back to horses later in life, and they're still grieving for what they did, or how they feel they've harmed a horse in their past, right? Or I think there's grief work there, right? Um, there's grief if you've lost your heart horse. There's grief of those things you wanted to accomplish, but maybe you think you won't.
Mm. If you're a horse nerd, and if you're on this podcast, I'm guessing you are, then you've probably also always wondered a little bit about the old master's system of dressage training. If you go and check out our Helios Harmony program, we outline there step by step exactly how to train your horse from the ground to become the dressage horse of your dreams in a way that absolutely serves the physical, mental, and emotional well-being of the horse and the rider. Intrigued? Like to know more? Go to our website, heliosharmony.com. Check out the free introduction course. Take it from there.
There's so much. And I mean, maybe grief isn't the correct word for it. I don't know. But I think there is. It's, you know. there's a loss at least.
Death of dreams,
Perceived
death of
loss. Yeah. I feel like I've had to do a lot of grief work, but not be eclipsed by it with like Stuart. For Stuart is the horse I've had since he was like just turned 4. And he's now probably like 25 and he's an amazing horse. And I've learned like just did everything for me and anything. And 2022 from being a horse who could do what you name it, he'd do it like through like PF changes, like whatever, and willing to give it to anyone, trail ride, whatever. He's great. He got EPM and went from being like the strongest horse I ever knew to barely being able to stay upright. And I think there's grief for like, what I would consider, but seeing how he's managed it and like now again, that daily meaning making of his loss and not being like, well, the story's over, right? Because in his heart, he wants to show up and do stuff, right?
yeah,
So it's been like, okay, well, where can we start? And so we started with like when it was too much of I was worried he'd fall over on me. We did like from protective contact, like trick training, touch this target, touch here, go there, right? That's where we could start. And then from there, it was because he had the in hand work kind of foundation. It was like, okay, well, let's start playing with some of this. What can you offer today? And then it was like, yeah. So never seeing, I'm getting off on a tangent here, but I think like, I feel like with my relation with him, it's been this constant like creating and how much I sometimes want to just stay stuck in the grief and be like, "Okay, his story is over. I'm gonna retire him. He's done." And how he refuses to let that happen
yes,
because you know, I had a friend who said, there are horses who whinny, and she's like, he sings an aria. He has the most operatic, like, just across the whole property will just the second you roll in, just like, "Come, like, I am here. What are we doing?" And like, yeah, and it has been so interesting because he's just keeps has kept showing up. And yesterday was the first day that I actually sat on him and since he was sick and because he had just kept showing like he was strong if he wanted to. And I was just like, all right, dusted off his old saddle, threw it on him, and it so didn't want to because I remember, like, earlier on in his recovery doing that and literally being like, "Okay, let's see if he can, like, trot on the lunge," and he fell over and, like, being like, "Oh gosh, like, he can't be And I'm not even saying, like, big circles, I'm saying, like, just trot down the long side, he fell over and, like, so being willing to like try that again, put a saddle on him, not out of fear of like, he's gonna hurt me, but just like, can my heart take being broken if I open up to this possibility?
mm-hmm.
And he God, if a horse could strut out of a paddock with a sound, like he was pumped and proud. And I know I'm putting human emotions on an animal anthropomorphizing, but it was just such a strong thing, and I just, like, got on him and was just like, "Okay, like, let's just walk," and he walked, and, like, I gathered up the reins, and from a walk, he went into a canter, and, like, and I was like, "Let's just do 2 or 3 steps," but, like, you know, it was and so the story continues, right, and I find myself now battling this idea of, like, do I want that to be the end? Because that was
Right,
so great, and I'm so scared. If we try again, what if it falls apart, right? And I think that's where loss for me shows up is sometimes that fear of
mm-hmm.
opening up to life being beautiful, like, knowing that it's not permanent. Like, right, I hate that. I hate it. And
Don't we
there's
all?
some places where I'm comfortable, but there are some places where, oh, it's terrifying. And so I wonder if that, there's sometimes in that, yeah, for like not wanting to lose again
Yeah, sure.
what we
Uh,
don't before.
you said just now, and so the story continues. And
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, why is it that horses help humans to deal with grief so well? Because we know that horses do, whether it's getting us through breakups, whether it's getting us through
Mm.
deaths, whether it's getting us through family mess ups, whether it's our own addictions or whatever, or fears, anxieties. Why do horses help us so much with this?
I I don't know. My guess is that again, being creatures who live in the present moment, they don't stay stuck in the past where a lot of grief resides. And so they maybe that's it. They make us continue.
Horses don't stay stuck. Yeah, I think you got it there.
Yeah. And, I remember another good Stewart story when I had him and was in my 20s going through a breakup that ended up being a breakup after a breakup. Like it was like we just kept breaking up. And it took me a while to learn. But I remember I was like, yeah, we had a fight. It was like 2 a.m. And I was living at the barn in the apartment by the barn. And so Stuart was like, right, just walk to his stable. And so I was like, I'm so sad. I'm gonna go see my horse because, like, I'm like, we're gonna have my friend flick a national, you name it, and you roll all the great horse movies into one. I'm gonna have like, yeah, that guy sucks. Like, this horse is where it's at.
You're going to
Like,
bring my drama to my horse.
right, right.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I walk in, and he's like munching some hay and stuff. And he's like, oh
So,
hey,
what up, dude?
yeah, and he's just like, "Hey, hello," and so I, like, walk in the stall, and he, like, walks over, and I'm like, "Here it comes," like, I'm just gonna hug it, and he goes over, and he's sorta like, "Okay, what's going on?" And I'm sure he's just like, "Okay, she's sad," and I'm like, let's do it," and he's like, let me pet him, and then I was just like, "And now you hold me," and that horse, we met, like, in the middle of his stall, and he put his head down, like, into my chest, and I'm thinking, "Here, yeah, he loves me," and he just headbutted me, and, like, like, and I had been like, "Maria," water working, and
I can't believe you did that to me.
he shoved me back, and I like boom into the back of the stocks, and I just stood there, somewhat stunned. And he looked at me, and I looked at him, and he just like blew and turned and went back to eating his hay. And I was just like, and then it became very clear. It's like, oh, he is not interested. And like, you know what? It's not pretty stupid. Um, this whole melodrama I was trying to they're like, none of it, like, I mean, I should just go to the bed. And like, yeah, and maybe there would have been others like, yeah, like probably the mayor I had in high school would have just like mothered me, or, it would have let me out. But like, that's not who Stewart is, and
Yeah,
that's
I know.
what
Yeah,
I
yeah, it's not
wanted.
him.
And I think, yeah, and I think, having a horse like Stewart in my life, especially through a period of my life where I went through so many changes of a horse who was just like, okay, like, we're going. Like, that's not, yeah,
Mhm.
you can be whatever you want to be, but let's keep moving. And
Let's keep moving. No, I agree. It's like I think that one of the so I was thinking dogs, like dogs do get involved in human dramas. Dogs die of broken hearts. Dogs are quite similar to us in many ways, and so sometimes can get stuck. Like we can get stuck. Horses don't, and they carry us, right? Even if we're not riding them, they still carry us metaphorically
well, and they
to another way of being, right?
right. And I mean, even when they carry us, they move us, right? Physically. Like if we are on, they're moving our bodies, which is again,
Mm.
like at the core of it, why adaptive
Yeah.
riding started, right? Is to get movement we wouldn't otherwise be able to give ourselves. And so yeah, I mean, and there is, you don't need me to tell you the healing that can come, the growth that can come through movement and
Mhm.
the antithesis of stagnation. And so maybe that is where horses help us, right? Is that
Yeah, I love that actually. Yeah, horses move your body. They do. They do. Whether you're on them or not, they move your body. You could say yes, you have to walk your dog, and it's not that dogs don't encourage movement, but and we all own dogs and love our dogs, so we're not disrespecting the dog. But there is, I think, this miracle that we are their predator. They are always skeptical of us. Are you going to eat me? And the answer is maybe, if I was hungry enough and I needed to feed my children, I wouldn't be happy about it. But, you know, so when you have that kind of reality, I think, in a relationship, and then, as you say, they move us, carry us, move us, help us transition, the story goes to the next chapter. And, you know, you've touched on storytelling so much in this conversation, whether through theatre arts or, you know, in so many ways. In your perfect world, where is the whole equine assisted field going? What do you want to see in the next 10 years?
I I would love to see more belonging, and by that I mean
Or
more
what, sorry?
belonging,
Belonging.
sense of
Okay.
belonging, and by that I mean that there are many individuals. I can think. It's not hard for me to think of someone who's like, name folks you think would make a great instructor. There are often people that I meet, and maybe some are not in the time of life to pursue it, but some people, like, their big obstacle is they don't believe that they can do it. And I strongly disagree, and we'll express that. But yeah, that idea of like, okay, because there are so many people that could provide, so like, that we need more, right? Like there are wait lists, and there are people who could
Mm.
help with that. And so I think if we and by
Would
belonging,
anybody involved in horses
yeah, yeah, and
offer something on the
mhm,
therapeutic?
and again, figuring out like, well, what is it? Is it doing mounted work? Is it the groundwork? Is it
Yeah,
right?
sure.
And I think that's what's great was things are spreading out as far as what ways you could pursue certifications to be a practitioner, right? There is something now at a level for, I think, an entry point for so many people. Now, what's preventing them from going there, I'm not sure. But I think that as professionals, like the more we, yeah, do like encourage people to pursue this, get curious
Mm.
about, yeah, is this the stretch place for them to step up here? So I'd like to see more belonging. I'd like to see, and I think that comes too from like places of different sizes, right? Like some people are comfortable working in big programs, some prefer backyards, horses as well, right? So like just having more diversity within
Mm.
how things are delivered. And I think for me, what I would love to get involved with is the idea of not siloing recreation riding versus adaptive versus lesson programs. Like I so value what I was able to experience growing up in a barn that, and it is hard, and I'm not going to deny, but like Valley Riding doesn't, man. They have people who pay their board, who understand lessons run at these times, and you ride with them, and no one gets to own the arena. And also understand that, yeah, we help out with the therapeutic program, but, like, I remember growing up, like, how rare is it to be, like, trotting around on your horse Sputnik and to look and see someone doing, like, tempi changes and all kinds of cool stuff, and, like, and to be able to have conversations with it, like, it's just I think that, again, as these worlds that all share a common mission, yeah, just trying to do right by our horses and,
Mm.
be
Yeah, I think I
offer
agree
this
with you.
connections, like, yeah, I would just I love the idea of things not being, because then too, that's how a kid like me could. grow up to be like, oh, well, I can be a horse owner, but I can also teach adaptive riding. I can also teach like none of this is mutually exclusive, and that they're not
Mm.
really that different when it comes down to it. Like, I mean, they are. There's technical skills, right? But the
Yeah, no,
mindset,
I think I agree with you. I think that if let's say you're at Pony Club,
yeah.
we all came up, I came up through Pony Club,
Mhm.
and if in Pony Club it was, I don't know, mandatory to do some sort of service, and that you could choose, there could be just a whole variety. Well, like when I was growing up, I loved hunting,
Mhm.
and one of the great fulfillments of my life in the last few years is that I've hooked up with this great hunt in Germany called the Weservale Bloodhounds. They're not hunting animals, we hunt each other, but it looks like fox hunting. And we have every year an inclusive hunt. You could make so many Borat like jokes of, no, we're only hunting the autistic people so much. But what we're doing, of course, is that we're creating a day where all the people who are in the Horseboy program can have a day riding to hounds. And we do it on our friend Henrik and Gitty's property, who run that great Horseboy program there, because we can choreograph it and control it and so on. But the amount of horse preparation that goes into it is insane, as you can imagine. But yet, we have, say, for example, Julian Berghoff, who is a young rider with spina bifida and hydrocephalus, coming back and saying, I rode to hounds, and for me to be able to sort of open up that world with the equine assisted world has a sort of particular resonance for my soul. So I get healed as well. And this, as you say, to silo it off, saying, well, if you're a fox hunter, or if you're an eventer, or if you're a show jumper, you're a dressage rider, or you're a therapeutic person, or you're Western pleasure, and that these things exist outside of human mental health. I think weirdly that actually harms the horse. I think what horses want to do is interact with us in this kind of cross species, cross mammalian way, tribal horse culture that, humans and horses evolved 4 to 6 thousand years ago out there on the steppe. And that's how horses want to engage, and that you talked about belonging. What is belonging? Belonging is tribe, clan. And we are all members of a global horse tribe, right? Which includes our people who perhaps are more vulnerable. If we, I think one of the things I love about observing horses that go into therapy programs is that they tend to do the job with enthusiasm. They tend to dive into the job. And I've never yet met a horse who said, oh, I don't do that because I'm actually, a Grand Prix horse. No horse has said that ever. That's a monkey idea, The horse says, I'm here. I'm available. You show me what it is you want from me, and if it's reasonable and doesn't make me feel horrible, I'll probably participate, in the just the same way you would. Coming down to love at the end of the day. Horses operate through love. Horses operate through emotion. Horses operate through that mutual support system that they have, even when they're being rude to each other, that we do too. So in your perfect world, would it be like that? Would it be that, say, at Pony Club level, or at 4-H, or, whatever is the entry point for the kid, that this is made front and center, rather than saying, well, the real stuff is over here. If you want to go play with the retards, well, okay, you can do that. But, rather, that I think is the message we all got growing up. But what if it was different? What if it was much more front and center? for the young riders coming in and validated in a weird way. Maybe you earned your points, towards whatever system you're working towards with a certain amount of service hours. You know, it's interesting that that's not built in, isn't it? That
Yeah, I'm
that
not
it's
aware if it is
not.
or if it isn't, but yeah, certainly. And it's definitely great to have, more opportunities. And my life has not been a very linear thing. And so I don't know. I wish there was something as a very simple direct line to making things happen. But I think the more that, yeah, again, you just have those possibilities strewn around. Like, does this
Exactly.
and people that instead of when someone comes to you and is like, I'm curious about this being that welcoming place as opposed to,
Mm.
well, you have to, and you jump through, prove yourself first, right? In order to be able to do this.
You must suffer first,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, yeah, you have
Prove
to
your
have some
worthiness.
skills as a training, but yeah, how do you make that again not so yeah, not making people feel like they're getting sifted out, right?
Exactly.
And so yeah, it's complicated to say the least. I think if it was simple, we'd have cracked the code, but maybe it is also simple and it's just sort of yeah, just being being willing to adapt and modify and improvise and change. You have structures that are helpful to have, but within that there's a lot of space to be creative. And so
Right. And I think your point earlier that if what we're primarily concerned with is the horse's well-being, not in a kind of we hate humans, we love horses, sod off you humans, but more from the point of view of if we're expecting or we would like this horse to give well-being to a human, it's probably a good idea if that horse has well-being to give. And I think if our focus is there, then the rest follows. As you know, with say, for example, movement method or horseboy method, it's follow the child. And if one does that, it seems that everything else falls into place. But when one doesn't do that, things tend to get kind of complicated. I would posit it's a bit the same with follow the horse.
yeah,
Where is this horse's happiness? Where is this horse's well-being? What does this horse really love to do? How do we make this horse feel as good in their body as we possibly can? Because that's going to translate to the mind. And then if we do that, probably whoever comes into contact with that horse is going to benefit, right?
yeah, one would hope, right?
100%.
But yeah, yeah, I think that sounds good. So yeah, I'm not sure what that perfect world would look like. But
Well, I can help people with that because I know this person called Betsy Kahl who lives
mm,
in Bend, Oregon, and I know that if people go to Betsy Kahl, because I've watched her at work over quite a few years, she will help them to understand how to put that equine well-being into their horses, which will then help them through a variety of methodologies give that well-being to monkeys, whether juvenile monkeys or adult monkeys. So I think people should actually reach out to you, Betsy, as a mentor in this, whether it's on the equine, i.e., dressage end, or on the therapeutic end, or all points in between. Is it all right if people contact you?
yeah, yeah, always. I always tell people contact me, and then I just sit and wait. Like,
How would they
gosh,
contact you?
let's see. They can contact me at Betsy at wonderhorseranch.org. That's the nonprofit that I had in Texas, but haven't figured out how to do
Mhm.
it yet. But that email still works. And that's probably the easiest one to spell. I also have,
Betsy at
yeah,
wonderhorseranch.org, right?
mhm, yeah. Uh,
Okay, listen, viewers and listeners, if you want to learn horsepower method, movement method, taquine, as we call it now, which is all the groundwork as its own therapy, And our Helios system of dressage, and also just the other stuff that Betsy can bring to the table all by herself without any involvement in me, of which there's plenty. I do thoroughly recommend that you reach out to her as a mentor. She's been in this for many years. She has produced amazing horses that I've seen. She's brought healing to the lives of so many people, including my own son. I can't recommend her highly enough. You have a mentor up there in that box above me, although probably in YouTube she's going to be here or here or here. But I'm sort of going to hedge my bets by pointing in all four directions. Contact this person because she can do the job and can show you how to do the job in so many modalities, also within the path system and others. So it's Betsy Kahl. Is it Betsy Kahl at wonderhorse.org?
No, it's just Betsy at
It's just
yeah.
Betsy. Okay.
Yeah.
Betsy at wonderhorse
Yeah.
ranch.org.
.org.
Betsy at wonderhorseranch.org. Reach out to her. Let her mentor you. She's a good mentor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. Please do. Yeah. I mean, if I can help, I will. Right. Yeah. I'm always curious about, what people are seeking. And again, if what I've experienced in my life can be supportive of any way, I'll share that happily. But I will say, even if it's not with me, that I do believe that learning the classical groundwork system is life changing for both you and your equines. And always you will always have some way to connect and create something magical with them. No matter the weather, no matter their ability, right? It's just something that
Absolutely. No
sounds so
matter whether you're in a
like,
arena.
yeah.
Absolutely.
And no matter what, even if something is going poorly, it's just the foundation you can return to
In
rebound.
handwork. Absolutely. It is the key.
Yeah,
And Betsy can teach you. So
yeah.
go to her.
Well, my horses can teach you. I was lucky enough to have some great horses that taught me, and they are happy to share as well. So yeah, thank you.
Well, it's been a pleasure.
Yes, it has.
I look forward to the next collaboration.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we will.
Story continues, right?
It does indeed. All right, my friend. I think we're going to have you on again in a few months and go into some more depth. I'd like to actually go into the theatre arts side.
Yeah.
Yeah, we barely touched on it this time, so maybe we'll do a follow up.
Sure.
You up for that?
Yeah,
Okay.
always. Yeah. Reach out. Let me know.
All right, good. And then hopefully I'll be seeing you soon. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. If you like what we're doing here, please do like, subscribe, tell a friend. It so helps us to get this valuable work done and the message of equine assisted stuff out there. And if you're interested in more conversations, you might want to check out our Live Free, Ride Free podcast. And if you'd like to support the podcasts, please go to rupertisaacson.com and click on the Patreon link. If you're a professional in the equine assisted field or are considering a career in the equine assisted field, you might want to check out our 3 certification programs: Horseboy Method, Movement Method, and Taquine Equine Integration. You can find all of those over on newtrailslearning.com. And finally, if you want to check out our cool rock and roll themed merch, back on rupertisaacson.com, please click on shop. You'll find all kinds of fun goodies there. And if you're looking for a way to spend time until the next podcast, you might want to consider reading the books that kicked all this off: The Horseboy, The Long Ride Home, and The Healing Land. So see you next time on Equine Assisted World. Join us for the adventure.